Hi, everybody. Welcome along to episode 99 of Percussion Discussion. I hope you're all well out there. As always, I'm going to ask you to please check out our social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and of course, our world famous YouTube channel, where you can find all of our conversations, past and present, where you can watch as well as listen, as there are videos up there. Please subscribe. It only takes a second, and this way it means you don't miss any of the upcoming interviews that we have. If you'd rather listen on the go, then this is no problem. All of our conversations are available in podcast form. These are free to download from your favorite podcast provider. So that if that's your thing, then you know what to do. Again, if you can leave us a very short review, it only needs to be a few words. It really helps get the word out there. And I would really appreciate that. So thanks. On to today's guest. As you know, this podcast is called Percussion Discussion. We've had plenty of percussionists on who play more in the vein of Latin percussion and pop percussion. This guy is a slightly different performer, definitely one of Britain's most diverse percussionists. He's studied classical percussion. He's played for the likes of The Who, Peter Gabriel. He's had his own solo projects. He's appeared on many film and TV scores such as Black Panther, Rocketman, Mission Impossible, and Doctor Who. So there's every chance that you've heard his incredible playing. He uses lots of technology. If you've not had the pleasure of seeing this guy live, please check him out. He's on tour very, very shortly. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the wonderful Mr. Joby Burgess. So, Joby, thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Hey, no problem at all, Matty. Thanks for having me on.
No, hey, it's a pleasure to have you here. And it's kind of a little bit different. We've had lots and lots of drummers on, some percussionists who are maybe more in the pop and Latin vein. So it's nice to have somebody who is a percussion soloist as yourself, so it's a little bit different. So I'm really looking forward to this one.
Cool, man. Thank you. We're looking forward to chatting.
Excellent stuff. So how's life at the moment? Is it all good for you?
Yeah, life's been pretty busy the last period of time. An awful lot of just recording sessions, various films, TVs, and albums. That's kind of been my world for quite a while now. And less touring. So it's my world's pivoted a little bit in recent months and years, but in a really nice way. So
sure. So I mean, I know you're talking to us from your studio at home at the moment, which looks a very nice space. I know we can only see a small section of it, so I'm guessing you're spending most of your time in there. Do you do a lot remotely?
I've always been interested in recording. I've always done the remote thing. But 2 years ago, it went from, the odd thing here and there, to doing an awful lot. So that was kind of good. But no, most of my session works at Abbey Road Studios or Studio. So North London is kind of the kind of home territory, I suppose. But it's really nice to have this space, and obviously it's great to work in. And when people don't have the budget for a project or there's no studio space, can just record anything and send it down the line and send it to anywhere in the world. So yeah. It's a place to have.
Did you find that you learned more about equipment and ways of doing things during the lockdown? Did you find it helped in some strange way, or were you already really good with it all anyway?
To be honest, I was pretty up together with it. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm a percussionist, first and foremost. I'm not an engineer, but when I was a kid growing up, I started by sort of songwriting and playing around 4-track tape recorders before I started playing drums. I grew up as a drummer, not a percussionist. I was very late starter percussionist, and so the recording thing's always been there. And my major elective when I went to college to study in London was electronic music. So it was I basically wrote and recorded an entire album with 30 or 40 different musicians on it, and that was for my degree, that was that sort of thing. And it's a skill that I keep learning. One of the things I really love is having engineers here to my studio, which it isn't very often, but it's always a brilliant learning experience. just to have people in the room, try some new techniques, get some new suggestions. But you can kind of learn that stuff all the way along the line. I mean, you sit in a recording session anywhere in the world, and you just have to pay attention. You're learning stuff. So yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. And the engineers that come visiting, do they like the space? Do they like the acoustic and what have you?
Well, it's not. Yeah. I mean, it's not a huge space, but there's quite a lot of room, and I've got a kind of vaulted ceiling, and it's quite a long room. So we spent 3 days, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, just spending some time. We emptied out the entire room. It's an old former coach house, so for coaching horses, when it was built 125 years ago. And we tried just starting off with a vibraphone, just a really one simple tuned instrument, and we span it around, and we used some different microphones and different techniques just to try and get a really clean, consistent sound with no, nasty reflections, and all that sort of stuff. And after about 2 days, we made a bunch of test recordings. We got something we were really pleased with. And the process from there was simply putting more different instruments in place. So we took the vibes away and we put a taiko in there. We took taiko away, put some toms in there. We took the toms away, put some bits of metal in there. And it's just it just then becomes a bit of refinement of microphone choice and what you're doing with the preamps. It's a bit more time consuming than doing drum set from home, because obviously if I'm doing a session, I'm doing 4 8 cues on a movie, then I'm not playing the same instruments in every cue, so I have to keep moving things around. But there's a really nice basic setup of 3 or 4 pairs of microphones, which are just all straight into the desk, and I just have to make some tweaks, and I can kind of get going really quickly for people.
Well, you mentioned that the vibes were the first thing that you tried to play about with. Would you say a vibes one of the trickiest ones to get a decent sound on, or is it just coincidence that?
A marimba would be the easier thing to put there, but a marimba's a really big instrument, so the vibraphone is just a little bit more easy to maneuver around the studio. I think for me, the vibraphone, of all the different sort of mallet instruments that I play, it's the one that's kind of closest to the human voice. It's got the most things you can do with it. So, I mean, you can strike it and you can, play different notes, but you can also bow it, so you can get long sustained notes. It's got a pedal, so like a sustain pedal on the piano. It's got a faux vibrato, so you can. It's a bit like the way a Fender Rhodes works, where the speakers kind of are in line and out of line, in and out of phase. So there's got quite a lot of things you can do with it. So you can think about different elements of the sound. So I think for me, whenever I'm playing mallet percussion, vibraphone and marimba are the workhorses for sure, but vibraphone is one that's got more flexibility. So yeah, I think if you can get a nice sound on that, then everything else kind of fell into line quite quickly.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's funny, as I'm sure there'll be a lot of drummers watching this, and things like note lengths isn't something you generally have to worry about if you're playing a drum set, is it really? But when you're playing a tuned instrument, especially vibes, you've got to consider that, haven't you? Which is quite cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's sometimes it's. I mean, obviously we can all play long notes, because if we're filling through something, or if we're rolling through something to fill up a kind of, fill up a piece of space, then we need to think about where that stops and how we grow that gesture in and out. So I don't think it's so different. I mean, you just don't have to. You have to think more about the attack on if you're just playing drums. But yeah.
Well, there we go. There's a place for everything, isn't there? Now, you've got a new album coming out pretty much the end of this month. I think you said it was the 30th of September, and a tour starting on the same day. So I'm guessing you're glutton for punishment. And I'm guessing, did you record that in your own space then?
Well, it was kind of hybrid. The idea originally was to record it down the smaller space at our studios in Hampstead, which is the studio George Martin built. I think in the 70s, it might be the 80s. It's after Montserrat, so it's probably the 80s. Which is a great, it's one of the 2 main spaces to record in London, one of the big rooms. but the Air has a smaller studio, Studio One, which I've done an awful lot of work in. It's a really beautiful space for recording percussion. It works really well in there. So if you've got a solo percussion session or 2 or 3 people, it's a fantastic room to play in. So the idea was always to go there and do the record. But the project as a whole was sort of blighted by COVID. It would have been finished a long time ago, but there wasn't the opportunity to tour. And so I didn't really kind of push the people who were writing on the project to get things finished, because at the end of the day, it's only a record, and everyone was having a tough time of it. And by the time we got around to getting ready to do the recording, which I did with a guy called Nick Woolidge, who's one of the in-house guys at Air, absolutely astounding engineer, mostly working in film music. That is kind of who's who of composers that he works for and films that he's done. He was really busy, and so was I. And the problem that kind of happened in the session world, I suppose, a year ago, and it's starting to sort of get a little bit easier, was everything was getting booked incredibly last minute. So because of lots of protocols being in place and people playing catch up in terms of getting their projects recorded, my work was getting offered, not even confirmed, but offered, just a few days before. So you might be, are you free, tomorrow? Are you free for 5 days starting Wednesday, and it's Monday? So it was really hard to commit to a chunk of time, and also getting studio time became harder, and it stayed that way. Even getting a studio in London, it doesn't really matter how much money you've got if there's no space, because everyone's booked it. There's no space. So given all of that, we decided to find a different formula. And what we did was I recorded the sort of core elements of the mallets here at my studio. Nick kind of got involved in how we were going to do that. And then we spent a day at Rack, which is it's a pop studio in St John's Wood. So it's kind of around the corner from Abbey Road. And the Studio One there, their main studio, is a really beautiful room. So we went there and we did 2 tracks there complete. We did one live. We just did 2 takes and then chose our favorite, and the other one we did in a couple of pieces, in a couple of edits, working with a composer, a guy called Dario Marinelli, and then we did a bunch of overdubs, things from that space that would sit well on top of recordings I'd made here. But all of the tracks have got an electronic component as well, so lots of the composers have used some sort of electronic treatment or sampling. There's a lot of voices, being a songbook. So all these rather disparate elements were actually quite easy for Nick to mix, because you had this kind of backbone of stuff from this space. You had a bunch of stuff that was either done in whole or parts at Rack, and then these other elements from the composers. So you had this kind of really strong thread in terms of the sound world. So yeah, it worked really well. I hadn't really planned to do that, but because I've been doing so much stuff from home, it seemed like it was a sort of sensible way to do. And it meant that I was able to record the record over the course of 3 or 4 weeks while I was just going down and doing other jobs in between, as opposed to sort of, blocking out 3 or 4 days and doing everything. So yeah, it was a different process to planned, but it was nice. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So, the stuff that you do in your own space, do you find that you're doing multiple takes, perhaps whether you need it or not? Are you a bit more of a perfectionist, would you say, when you're in your own space, or obviously when you're paying for somebody else's time? How does that work?
No, well, I think one of the things that's really useful is if you've done a lot of sessions over the years, then you sort of know how when enough is enough. Yeah. And that can be a really, really useful thing in terms of making your own recordings. If you're engineering your own recordings, I think there is that real danger when you start doing that to just go, oh no, it's not quite right, I'll just delete that. It's not quite on the thing. You have to know your limits in terms of maybe the number of hours you're going to record in a day. You have to know your limits in terms of what really makes sense. I think one thing we talk about at work occasionally is that, we might be doing, we might be tracking some drums, or some, whatever it is on a movie score, and we're always last. The percussion section goes down last, so the composer will have done their mock-up. They know kind of exactly how it's going to go. The director's heard it, seen it to picture, and then they've recorded a week of strings, a bunch of brass, woodwinds. They've had some soloists in, piano, harps, whatever. There's loads of synth stuff in there. They might have had a rhythm section through it as well, and then you get to the percussion sessions. And you're doing your thing there, and you kind of go, oh, that wasn't quite that. But you also bear in mind that they've recorded. They might have like 200 tracks up. They're watching the picture. There's a load of dialogue on top, and your thing was really good, and it fits in perfectly with what the music is, and what's required. So I think having had that experience has really helped, in terms of thinking about, well, actually that feels really good, that sounds really good, as opposed to going, oh, it's this kind of strange bit of perfection we're looking for.
Oh, that's interesting, because I've often wondered, because it must be tempting, especially younger guys who are just coming into it. I will just keep doing take after take, and I'm sure you're going to burn out after a little while of doing that. You're going to have to, just give it all up for a little while, and so that's just really interesting. It always fascinates me.
I think, there's an interesting thing about diminishing returns. So you can keep on going, but you're not getting any more. You're just getting more versions of not quite what you wanted. And there's that thing with, it's changed a bit in recent times. People trying to do studio days which are 9 or more than 9 hours a day. I mean, you do 2 and 3 hour sessions, and if you're really, you're playing a lot of stuff in those sessions, and you're really, focused, you're pretty tired after that. And if you then go off and do something else, it can be a real push. Having said that, having done 3 session days over the last weekend, I sort of remember how that feels. So,
well, you've got to do it when the work's there. You have to do it, don't you? It's as simple as that.
Sometimes you just have to, yeah.
Just knuckle down, get it done. Now, the tour, are you going to be touring? Is this all the pieces from the new album? Is that the way it's going to work, or are you going to?
Yeah, so the record is 9 new tracks, seven commissioned from different composers, and I wrote 2 tracks myself. And the tour is just the record, nothing else. Well, nothing else at the moment. We haven't done the production rehearsal yet, so we haven't found out how short the show is. I think it's only it's an hour, but I must admit I quite like that in terms of a gig. You don't want to go and spend 3 hours of the evening. You want to be able to go and have some drinks or have some dinner, see a gig. So I think that's probably what we'll do. We'll just do it straight through. We won't do the album straight through because it wouldn't really make sense. But we'll do that collection of pieces in the appropriate order for a live show.
Yeah, and just have a proper intense hour, and then that's it, done. Yeah, that sounds good. And as far as obviously, I'm pretty certain there's a ton of instruments that you'll need to take along. How do you approach setting up on a stage? Because obviously, I'm guessing it's just you. There's nobody else involved apart from technicians and what have you. Do you just kind of built into gear, or do you have a way of looking at that?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because one of the great problems with playing drums and percussion is that we do tend to create this massive barrier between us and the audience, and I've always looked for ways around that. And there are a few solo pieces that I've played, and of which they've been the most successful pieces. There's a piece that I do for just solo berimbau, which is this Angolan shepherding instrument. Nana Vasconcelos used to play it. It was his kind of party instrument. It's just a bow and arrow with a gourd and a stick and a stone. There's a thing that I do for soda bottles, for Nigerian Fanta bottles with electronics.
Oh, yes. I've seen it.
Okay, so you know this. Yeah, okay, you've seen this one. And they're really powerful because there's nothing, it's this one small object, and it's this really diving deep into it and just, not putting anything between you and the audience. Not to say being naked, but it's kind of like, there's nothing else there. And so if you're playing, drum set, or if you're, playing, a huge rig of percussion, what you tend to do is you get behind the percussion, and then you put more stuff up above you, and the audience is over there. So they, they're lucky if they can see your face. They're even luckier if they can see your hands striking things, and also those are the two things the audience wants to see. So I thought really early on about, with this project, there's only melodic instruments. And what I've designed is like an L shape with no instruments at the front at all. Okay. So all the composers had to kind of write with this in mind. So on the left side is a very large marimba with various bells and gongs mounted above it. But if you're sitting in the audience, you can see right down the instrument, and you can see the contact and all of the instruments. And there's a kick drum which is kind of stuck out of the way with one of those brilliant extending pedals. And on the other side is the vibraphone with a thing called an allophone, which are these aluminium sort of discs, like kind of UFO discs. Okay. A kalimba, which is a little fun piano, and then at the back there's this thing called a space harp, which are these very long rods of.
So you play it?
Yeah, you rub it. In America, they'd call it rub rods, and it kind of makes this semicircle of instruments which I sort of inhabit, but it means that the audience can always see what's going on, but they can also see you fully in terms of what you're doing. So they can see the paddling, they can see, the sticks going up and down. They can see the changes of mallets. They can see. Often you have to move across, from one side to the other, or from instrument to instrument. So just try to really think about how that was as a presentation, as opposed to just seeing a wall of gear. Where you can't really see anything. Do you remember Eric Delaney? That
yes,
crazy.
Of course.
I remember seeing him. I've seen him a few times, but I saw him as a kid. I think it was somewhere probably in Bristol, and right. The world's smallest big band, wasn't it? And he had all the jokes, and he had everything, but he also had the drum set, big double bass drum set with all the toms,
timpani.
And typically, but he had it. But the drum set was on this riser, so it went round. So it all went dark, and then the whole thing went round. So you could actually see. What was going on, and it's not that thing, because on the screen we can. It's nice when we're watching a video. We can see what someone's doing from above or from the side or whatever. But don't necessarily want to go to a gig and watch a screen always. So that was for this project. That was kind of the thinking, to kind of create this one setup where it was fairly open and people could kind of get a good look at what was going on.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Well, it sounds really exciting, that. And there's one question I have to ask. Obviously, you've got, I think you said 7 pieces commissioned.
Yeah.
How do you go about? I'm assuming you'll learn all the repertoire. There won't be any music stands on display, or do you kind of sneak a few in, or how does that work?
Well, some of it's really hard, so I'm not going to. It's not all going to be memorized, no. And also, I mean, I'd like to. That's always kind of nice, but I mean, the thing is that the music stands are the worst. If you have got any bit of sheet music, then that's always even more problematic, because if you've got an instrument and then you've got a stand, that tends to go between you and the audience as well. But no, I mean, the album I recorded last September. It was mixed and mastered over Christmas. So I've actually just started relearning the piece. So the last week or so, ready to take them on tour. So we made some videos at some point last year as well. We made some live performances for Cambridge Music Festival, who were one of the people who helped fund the project. So they commissioned the pieces. The idea originally was the first gig would be with them. Sadly, that didn't happen. So we made some videos for their online festival, which they did. I think it was probably last December, something like that. So we made some videos for them. And a lot of those videos are coming back out now, so you can watch those online as well now. So it's kind of been, it's bit of a process, but yeah, I'm relearning things now. I spent today relearning one of the pieces that I wrote because I couldn't work out what I'd written. So,
So, I mean, this is one thing that's always fascinated me with professional players, you know, be it percussion or any other instrument. When you're on stage and you're on your own, you know, and you've got an auditorium full of people watching you, do you use your music purely as just, you know, a safety net, or are you actually what? Because it never looks like that you've got your head in the part. You know, it always looks artistic, sounds great. And I'm just
yeah.
wondering, how much are you just using it for just to remember odd little sections, or are you actually following it all the way through?
No, not following all the way through.
Okay.
I mean, it's more of a, you know, it's kind of an aid. I mean, I think music in general written music is certainly a roadmap.
Mm.
I mean, I spend a lot of time reading because not all, but you know, the majority of sessions I do, there are charts and we're sight reading, and you know, in London, first and second takes are kind of the thing. That's why America comes. So because we're quick, we're known as being really quick here in London. So you know, in that instance, you really have to have your head down, but you always, you know, you have to have your head. You know, you have to have your focus on the chart and take that in. But I think once you've learned things, you know, once things have gone in, it's more of a, you know, just an aid to kind of keep things there. I mean, I'm doing a tour in the UK, and it's like 5 shows, and the next shows that I have doing this project, I mean, these are the first shows I've done in 2022, which is bizarrely unusual for me. But that's, you know, just having pivoted my career a little bit, are in Vancouver in January. So I can't spend, you know, a week getting everything by memory and then doing 5 shows, because economically that would break me, because there are other bits of work I have to go and do. Yeah, I mean, these things kind of go in. Sometimes things just go in and they stick. But there's some of these pieces, there's an awful lot of dots, and there's you know, there are some bits of text as well. There's one where I actually sing using a vocoder. I sing. I deliver the vocal on top of the marimba. So I'm playing this quite choppy marimba thing, and then delivering this vocal about. It's a piece about our species, about the population increase across the last 300 or 400 years, and just kind of getting everything would be too much. But yeah, so it's kind of, you know, it's just there. I mean, I think everyone does it. I think it's just one of those things. Yeah, we need to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not knocking it, because as a reading drummer, I'm terrible. If there's a part there, I will look at it regardless.
Oh, okay.
You know, I can't take my eyes off it, and it becomes more than a safety blanket. It's gospel, you know,
Right.
which is really, really bad. But that's just the way I've kind of done it over the years. And
it's quite interesting, because you think about you think about drummers, and I think about a lot of the players, because I grew up as a drummer. A lot of the players that I sort of loved, you know, people like Gadd and Vinnie Colaiuta, and you know, someone like Kenny Aronoff, who goes on about writing charts. And it's kind of one of those really essential skills. And if you're doing sessions, you're not there to spend the time doing 6 or 8 takes. I mean, most really fantastic musicians will go in and they'll have a listen, they'll work out what they're going to do, and they'll need some sort of, you know, roadmap, as it were, to find their way through the music. So yeah, all the guys have to do it. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's encouraging. I mean, it sounds like it's going to be quite an exciting experience for yourself, as you say, having this unusual setup with nothing between you and the audience, and, you know, first time playing live in 2022. Are you excited about it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm weirdly, I'm working on a different project for the days immediately before the first gig, which isn't ideal, but it's just how it's fallen. So yeah, I am excited. I am really excited, and it's been weird not playing live. I did, when I started working, playing live was the thing that I did. 100 gigs a year or whatever it was. And over the years, things have shifted, and I've done more recording and less touring. Although the touring was always, pretty nice, and it was kind of, 1 or 2 weeks tour was long for me. I mean, the longest tours I've ever done are 3 weeks. So I've never kind of gone on the road for 6 months doing one thing. Yeah, it'll be nice to kind of go back to it. I think I've missed it, but I'm not entirely sure. But the few things that I did last year I found very weird. I found them not hugely enjoyable, which was strange. I'm not really sure if that was a mixture of what the projects were, or if it was just the way that the audience was at that time. It was people kind of coming back to it. Yeah. It felt a bit different. So yeah, no, I am looking forward to it a lot. Yeah, oh. I'm not sure I'm looking forward to sitting in a van, but there we go.
Well, you can't have one without the other, unfortunately, can you? So, if you don't mind, Joby, let's take us back to kind of your early memories of music. I mean, forget drums and percussion for now. Let's go back a little while.
So I suppose my first love was W.H. Smith's in Wiltshire, buying 7-inch singles of all things pop. So like 1986, everything that was big in '86. It's all that sort of stuff. That's what I grew up listening to first of all. But I was really lucky because I grew up in a household of music, and I was exposed to this really wide array of things. So my dad had this amazing record collection, and it went for everything from, Miles Davis and Milt Jackson, modern jazz quartet, all the way back to, Mozart operas, and he was quite into modern vocals, people like Leonard Cohen and Eurythmics and stuff like that. So all that's, music was a really big thing in the house. My parents weren't musical at all. So it's kind of weird, really diverse mixture of stuff that I was sort of brought up in. And I suppose I kind of went the usual route. I mean, I started playing rock and roll drums when I was about 12, and I got quite into jazz quite quickly. Used to play a lot of big band stuff and also sort of trio and septet stuff as well. And then percussion came along a bit later. I mean, because I could play drums, it was always, can you play in this thing? And maybe you could play this thing that's not the drum set, but it's, a bass drum, or it's a snare drum, or, there's this thing called the glockenspiel. Can you play a few notes on that? Well, yeah, it's a bit like playing drums, but it's not. But there was a piece of music that a friend of mine, Graham Fitkin, wrote called Hook, which is this thing for four marimbas with rototoms and kick drums. It's kind of influenced by Chicago house music. It's a piece from the early 90s, and I remember buying that on like a sampler album of kind of new music. So it'll be in the section with Michael Nyman and Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk. It's kind of that sort of section. And I was like, I've got this thing. It was like two quid. It was like the sampler of this new label, and it was the first track on there. I went home, I was like, wow, this is really cool, because it's just got four to the floor bass drums and this very choppy house music sort of marimba writing, all in unison. So it's kind of, it's this really big sound, and that sort of really opened my ears up to something different. And I went and got some lessons playing the marimba, and I suppose kind of the rest is history, because I almost didn't I then went almost straight to college, playing on orchestral course, as opposed to going playing jazz drums. And then I'd fallen into things like Frank Zappa and Varese, so quite modern experimental music. I mean, Zappa's obviously a rock and roll guy, but he was really into writing really out there, very difficult music as well. And the beginning part of my career was playing some of that sort of Fleischert music.
Have you ever attempted the Black Page?
Yeah, I've played the Black Page, not for a long time, but yeah,
That's some achievement. That nice little gentle sight reading.
Absolutely.
So obviously, had you had obviously, with a tuned, obviously you're reading melody. Had you had piano lessons or something at an early age to help with this, or was this something that all happened at once?
No, I did have piano lessons when I was a bit younger, but I was terrible. I was a really terrible pianist, and I still am. So no. The reading music came from learning drums, really. Which and drum music. I think drum music's it's a kind of great way in, because it's slightly more simplistic to read. I mean, because you've only got you start off, you've got 4 drums. Okay, so there's 1 in each space, and there's some choice about the crosses, what they represent, and obviously when you go to mallets or whatever it is, there's just more notes, so there are more things to kind of find on the music. But I think it's a bit like anything. It's just there are patterns there. The way that music is constructed. I mean, most of the music I play on mallets, you look at it and go, oh, that's fine. That's just C major, or it's A major, and then it's going to this minor key and blah blah blah, and it's loud, it's soft, it's fast, it's slow. I need to use the mallets in this way, whatever. It's a bit like when we look at a chart on drums, and you go, well, it's 2 and 4 and a bit of Friday at the end, and that's it. It's not. I don't know. It's kind of. It's just. I suppose. I mean, music's just like another language which we've all learnt. So yeah.
Absolutely. So obviously you've gone to, did you say it was Guildhall you went?
Yeah, I was at the Guildhall in the 90s, which was a great place to meet. Met some amazing people there. So yeah, it was cool.
And obviously you study. I know I mentioned the classical word earlier on when we were off air, and it was a wry smile. Now you understand what I mean. They're classical percussion instruments, aren't they? And you need to learn the appropriate, the correct way. I'm the worst tuned percussionist on the planet, as anyone who's ever heard me will back it up. But I'm always in awe of people like yourself who have that skill. I mean, was there ever any intention that you were going to be a section member in an orchestral percussion team, or were you always going to be a solo percussionist? You're going to be your own man?
Well, no, I don't. No, I don't think so. I mean, my interest. Well, I did when I first graduated. I did a number of different things. I took on some teaching commitments, mostly teaching drum set. I was depping on a show at the National Theatre, which was really free. There was 6. As Bosco de Lavaro was the percussionist, and Simon Limbrick was the guy I was depping for, and that was kind of, it was African balafon and steel pans and a bit of vibraphone and a bit of waterphone, effects and stuff, and so that was kind of almost improvising for 2 or 3 hours, and I had my own duo project with an oboist, which was kind of fairly out there, experimental, sort of written free-form music, and some of the other things I was offered to do was to play with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, which I did as an extra for about 18 months. And so I got to go and do lots of amazing, full-on orchestral concerts, quite more modern stuff. So, things like I got to do stuff like Stravinsky's Petrushka, which is, 100 years old now. So that was about the oldest thing I was allowed to do. And that was really playing in an orchestral section. And I really enjoyed that experience. We went all across Europe, and we worked with Pierre Boulez, very famous French composer, and doer of good things. He built a huge electronic music studio in Paris in the 70s, and I really enjoyed it. But I did always feel like I was one part of 100 110 people sometimes.
Yeah.
And what that experience really taught me was that I didn't really want to be one of 110 people. I wanted to be one of something a lot smaller. So I sort of then did a lot of chamber music for, I don't know, the kind of coming years. Did a lot of work with my old percussion group, Ensemble Bash. We toured a lot with Joanna McGregor, the pianist, Stuart Copeland, for a lot, and Nana Vasconcelos, various different people. And that was also, that was like kind of for percussion with other guests. And that was, so it was always getting smaller, but you'd be making a lot of the artistic choices and thinking about those things. And the solo thing really came out of a project called Power Plant, which is a project I formed in 2005. We put out a record a couple of years later, and it was electronic. It was kind of electronics and percussion, and the percussion was really small. There was like a kind of half drum set, a few sort of found objects. This cool electronic instrument called a xylosynth, which is built here in England in Leicester by a guy called Will Wernick. And it's like a synth, but you play it with mallets. So, you can play pitches and, you can play soft synths and samples with it as opposed to, sounding like a marimba.
And it means similar to a mallet cat or
yeah, it's like a mallet cat, but much, much better.
Okay.
Because it's not made of bits of rubber. It's got wooden. It's like it feels like you're playing a real instrument. It's got like these wooden keys, really beautifully crafted. And so that sort of project was originally myself with a video artist and a sound engineer and a string quartet. And that obviously was quite expensive as soon as we went out of the UK. So the string quartet didn't come a lot of the time. So we had to find some more bits of repertoire. So that became a kind of a trio project to go out. And then a few projects down the line, it was kind of, I did some things that was just myself and electronics. I suppose the electronics for me is the binding thing. I don't really go on stage and play like totally solo. I'm always using some sort of electronic treatment. And in fact, on this new record, there's one track which I play, with nothing more than just like a delay. So it's just the marimba playing these kind of long tremolos into a delay unit, and then that's the result. That is, that's the piece. There's nothing more complicated than that. It's just one shape. So I suppose it's a bit like, I think it's probably like most people's careers. Things come along, and you get known for doing one thing, and you get asked to do more of it. And if you put yourself into that sort of sphere, then that's what happens. So I didn't really set out of any great plan. I've just always done. I feel very lucky, but I've just done the things that people have invited me to do. And by saying no to some things, that's kind of that's the choices you make, I suppose.
So it's kind of an organic process where you found yourself now. It's just happened, and this is where you want to be, which is amazing, really. So
yeah, it has. I mean, it feels really nice. I suppose for me, the most in the ongoing relationship is mine with the writer or the composer or the producer, irrespective of where I'm doing a solo project and recording and touring and commissioning, or if I'm going to the studio to work on a TV show or whatever. The interesting thing for me is that dialogue, that bit of conversation with that person to create something, and what thing that I might bring that will, make the end product as interesting and unique as possible. People are often after, the newest sound, or what haven't you done on anyone else's record? What instrument haven't you played on someone's film? I mean, that's kind of, people are often wanting, that new thing.
Which boundaries can you push?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You've just jogged my memory when you said Ensemble Bash with Stuart Copeland. I know he talks about that quite a lot in his book, doesn't he? If you've read it, I don't know if you have or not.
I haven't read Stuart's book. No.
He mentions Ensemble Bash in it, and were the gigs in Italy Was there a lot
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Yeah, so we
Sounded like a
did this.
fun gig.
It was it was a brilliant few years actually. I think it was like early noughties, and the first show I ever did was Stuart. It was it was a double header in London. So it was Stuart's, a collection of Stuart's film music, and um, I mean none of the Police stuff, but it was kind of a collection of film music and TV stuff and other bits that he'd written along the way, and with a small kind of an orchestra. It's like 15 piece. It's kind of tiny, but then 4 percussion as well. And then in the first shows we did, the support was Bill Bruford and Earthworks.
Oh wow! Okay, now we're talking.
Yeah, so it was kind of this weird double header of Bill Bruford and Earthworks was only like a 4 piece, and then Stuart with his band, which I suppose was like 20 people, came in afterwards. And then I think in the autumn we went to Italy and we did 4 or 5 shows. We recorded this record called Orchestrali, but we used to open up. So Bash, the quartet, used to do the first 25 minutes, and then we'd be joined by the rest of the band and Stuart, and would play all of his music. And yeah, it was a really beautiful time. So fun memories of Italy. We did lots of tours there with Stuart.
Oh, amazing, just incredible. Now there was one thing I don't really write questions down, but more,
but you wrote one down.
Well, bullet points more than questions. Okay. And obviously you mentioned the piece Fanta. Okay, now if anybody watching or listening haven't seen it, had the pleasure of seeing this, can you just explain a little bit of how it works? Because it's incredible. is the only way.
Yeah. So this is a piece that was written for me in 2006 or 7. A friend of mine, Gabriel Prokofiev, who's a producer and composer. We were sort of doing our own things in different bits of London at the same time, and we were like, "Oh, we must do something together." This feels like a cool idea. So he came up to my studio, and we had this long conversation about music and drums, and what he might be interested in doing. And just as he was about to leave, he said, "Oh, what's that glass Fanta bottle doing on your?" It was in like there's percussion instruments here. There was obviously a glass Fanta bottle there, and I had this Nigerian Fanta bottle because it's serrated, so you can use it like a guiro, like a scraper. So I just have one in my bag all the time, in the toy bag. And he said, "Oh, I've been to Tanzania and I've seen people playing, Fanta bottles, but like a cowbell, just banging them with a wooden stick or a metal stick." So, "Oh, okay, cool. Well, yeah, why don't we do a piece for a Fanta bottle?" So, it uses 2 full bottles of Fanta. So, and it's this kind of larger Nigerian size, and the first half of the piece, you use a metal beater, a small metal beater, and you effectively do everything you can to the bottle to produce sound from it. And also at the same time, I'm using a looper to kind of record myself and sample myself. And then I'm using the laptop to process the sound and filter the sound. You can strike it, you can rub it, all those sort of things. But one of the things that's really cool is if you take a glass bottle that's full and you tap it, but then you move it across, so you turn it to the side, the liquid in the top changes, so the pitch of the bottle actually changes. So then you can play little bits of melody. So that was kind of the, wow. So we made this piece. It's like 7 minutes long. And about halfway through, you put the bottle down, you open it up, and you play it in a whole different way. So if you haven't seen it, there's a couple of different video versions online, and you can work out how many things you can do with a Fanta bottle.
Because it's on your YouTube channel, isn't it? I think that's where I viewed it.
Yeah. We recorded. There's quite a recent one which we did during COVID, which was shot. I think we did a bunch of pieces down in Oxford, in a theatre in Oxford. So there's a really nice kind of fairly recent version of that piece there, and it's got a beautiful video as well. So Kathy Hind is a visual artist that I've worked with for many years, and she created all this beautiful video using stuff from an orange factory in I think it's from Brazil. It should probably be Spain, really, and that's where oranges are from. And then she got loads of old Fanta adverts from the 70s and 80s, so they sort of appear later on in the piece as well. So it's kind of got this lovely sort of retro sort of video that accompanies the performance as well. So yeah, it's nice.
An incredible piece of it. Has anybody from Fanta seen it? Do you know? Have you had any correspondence from anybody?
I haven't had the pay. I haven't had the check. No.
My lifetime supply of Fanta. Who knows?
I'm not sure I do.
Do you know something that interests me, and that is when somebody composes something like that for you? I mean, a Fanta bottle isn't your standard percussion instrument. How the hell is that notated? How do you take the composer's wishes, if you like, and bring them to life on something like that?
Well, that particular piece, because there's so much electronic processing, the score is very it's quite loose, just in terms of, you know, there's a motif and a gesture which you do, and then you sample it and you go on to the next one and you build the piece. I suppose a bit like in the jazz world, with the way that with that piece, and it's a whole suite of movements. We're using different instruments we did in the end, so that sort of grew into a bigger thing. It's when we got down and made the recording, that sort of fixed it. You know, that's the final thing. And I think because, you know, I toured it for maybe a couple of years from before we got into the studio and did the album. A lot of things have sort of changed. The way that the audience reacted to the piece, you know, made me do things in a different way, and I'd found new things I could do, and so it's kind of, you know, it's a collaborative thing. I mean, Gabriel wrote the material, but certainly there's a lot of input from myself as the performer. But for example, that piece, which is it's like a half-hour suite for global junk. So it starts with an oil drum. There's some plastic bags. There's a packing pallet, goes on a forklift, which you made into some sort of kind of sort of ropey xylophone, I suppose. And I don't need to follow a score for any of that, which is great. It's just moving from gesture to gesture. Nothing's really totally locked in. So from night to night, that can flex a bit, which is cool as well.
But if anybody hasn't seen it, please check it out, because you'll be knocked out by this. You really will. It's like nothing you've probably ever seen before. You know, and I guess, I don't know, I've never seen those particular bottles. How the hell do you get those? Do you get them shipped over or something, or?
Well, no. I mean, I used to. I must have I've picked those up in Africa, and you can buy it on the pier in Los Angeles as well.
Okay.
I remember buying it there. Weirdly, the Mexican bottles are different, annoyingly. But Gabriel lived in a little bit of North London where there's a big African market, so it was quite easy to get a few, but they've become quite hard to get. So after a few years of, you know, buying a crate of 50 at a time and flying them around the world, you know, from new, I bought one of those beer rebottling kits. So you can you don't have to, you know, open a brand new bottle of Fanta every time, because you sort of need one for sound check just to make sure it's going to work, and then you need two for the piece. So we first went to, I think the first gigs we did after the album was done. The album's called Import Export. Where in the States we did a little run on the East Coast, starting at Le Poisson Rouge, which is kind of opposite the Blue Note in New York, and we took kind of 10 or 12 bottles with us, and then we didn't have anything left to do with them, so we kind of gave them away at the end of the last gig on tour. But we sort of had to find a better way to kind of get around the world with these bottles.
And obviously a bit precarious using glass bottles. Have you ever broken one?
Yes.
Nice. On stage?
Yes. It happened once. And it was a while ago, and obviously, I think refilling bottles means the glass gets struck more times, and it sort of there's one moment early on in the piece where you gently push the two glass bottles together, kind of like claves.
Yes.
I mean, you're not doing this, but you're just very gently making this kind of like slightly kind of knocking sound, and then one of them just exploded, and I mean, the audience thought it was brilliant. I was less convinced, not least because my laptop, which does all the processing, was a sea of Fanta.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and weirdly, the laptop was fine. A bit crunchy with the keys.
Yeah, a bit sticky.
It was fun, but it worked. I mean, it sort of had a little pause while we sorted things out on stage, and I went and found something else to wear. But yeah, got through that show. That's about the worst thing that's ever happened, I think.
Hey. Now, look, I know it's not almost been an hour. Well, it has been an hour already, and I told you 40 minutes, but there's one more thing I'd like to ask you about.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
In the early dark days of COVID, I know it's still around, but thankfully it's taking a back seat now. You did a virtual marimba choir with, I think it was 200 and I don't know how many players, 200 and something from all around the world. Now, a beautiful piece of music which I've heard many times is Eric Whitacre's Sleep. And now the thing that fascinates me here, it was stated there was no click track used. How do you even approach that without a click? Because I've sat and thought about this and thought I just don't know. I've no idea how you'd even
Yeah. Well,
excuse me.
It was kind of a weird project for many reasons. Obviously, the world fell to pieces, and I was really taken with. Do you remember those images of some of the people in northern Italy singing to each other from different blocks of flats from across, because they were all confined to their rooms, and it's one of the first places in Europe, particularly where that happens. The lockdown happens in sort of early March, and I was like, oh. And people started going, oh, what is going to happen here, and what are we going to do? And I was like, oh, well, I made these arrangements of some of Eric's music and just recorded them recently, or had recorded them the year before. I was like, well, perhaps we could do something with that. And Eric actually created virtual projects 10 years ago. So he's kind of like the godfather of virtual music making. He's done it. He actually did a virtual project during COVID as well. And it's a vocal thing, so you only have to sing. So it's a lot more, the logistics are much easier. But I think he had like 18,000 people take part in I think it was number 6 or 7 that he did. And obviously, there's a whole, ship they'd built to work on it. But I was like, well, we could do this. The thing about not using a click track was just to try and make it a bit more human. So what I did was I had a demo which I had created myself using some of the virtual sort of soft instruments that I've created, and it's got a lot of flex in it because I didn't, when we made our recording, which we did in this beautiful church in London, we didn't use a click, and we just sort of we rehearsed it and then we played it, and we got a really nice sounding take, and we did whatever edits we had to do, and got a really nice sound. But there's lots of ebb and flow to it, so I mapped out a click for myself as a reference, and then I created a video. A conductor's video. So I just literally stood in the studio, against one of the walls, put a video camera up, and I conducted. I'm not a conductor, but I do love having a go. And
so that was precise due to the click, basically.
That was me listening to the mock-up, to a demo version with a click track, and then me kind of conducting to that thing, and then the things that we made for people to play along to, because there's kind of an issue with copyright on the music. So I actually made all of these things. I can't believe I made all of these things, but I made a little video which was basically me conducting, and then underneath you'd have the bit of sheet music which you'd have to play at the time. So there were 4 parts, so you could pick which part you wanted to play, and you could practice it as many times as you want. You just stuck all the videos on YouTube and you just watch. You watch me. You'd have the ensemble performing the whole thing, so you could feel like you were part of it. And it was just it seemed like a really nice way to do it. So all those, young people and some professionals and who had an instrument but no one to play with because everyone was locked in at home, they could have this kind of music making where they could learn this new bit of thing. They could use whatever. They didn't have to use a marimba. They could use any instrument they wanted. I even encourage people to make a bottle phone, which is just a bunch of tuned bottles. And you'd have this experience of kind of working with me, I suppose. You'd have to watch me in order to get everything in the right place, to get your offs and get the starting points and things. And it works brilliantly well, and loads of people from all around the world. I think it's like 40 something countries people put videos in from. They sort of all came back, and then the horror of how we're going to put all that together dawned upon me.
Wow. Yeah.
But there was kind of like 3 weeks where people were doing their bit, making their recording, making their video, and then there was 3 weeks of fairly intense production. I was lucky to have 3 friends who did an awful lot of very impressive work to put that final video together. So yeah, if you haven't seen that, it's a lovely I want to say memento, but that's probably not the right word. It's just a lovely thing that we made at that time.
It's the results are stunning, aren't they? And something to really look back on and be proud of, that that you were at the helm of it all. And yeah, I think it's fabulous. But the no click thing has always fascinated me. I thought, how does it? But now it makes sense now.
The click, yeah, on that particular video. I mean, I do. I mean, I spend most of my time working with a click track, but often asking it for the volume to come down. There was one experience I had, which was really exciting. Maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, we did the music. When you go to the cinema and you see the adverts for the film that will come out in 6 months or 3 months. When Jurassic World was done a couple of times ago, we did the pickups. We did that bit of music, and we spent the morning recording some of John Williams's music from the original trilogy, from the Jurassic Park movies, with one of his conductors. To something called streamers. So something in the movie business they used to use to get the music synced with the picture was this thing called streamers. So it's basically this line moves across, and that shows you where the beats are, and only the conductor gets to see the streamers.
Like so karaoke, where the words light up.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, and so the streamers are put in place, and then so it's almost like they're watching the movie. They're watching the movie and trying to get in sync with that. So you get the thing that you get as a result of that is this lovely flex in the band moving, because that's what music used to do. And even lots of rock and roll, you listen to stuff from the 70s and even the early 80s, the music flexes because they didn't use a click track. And then in the afternoon we recorded Michael Giacone, who did the 3 subsequent films, and we recorded some of his music, but that was all on click. It was like, oh, this is easy. We don't even have to think about this. It was a kind of interesting day. I mean, it was lovely to record all of that music again, or some of it again, and some of it for the first time. But it was that experience of being on and off click, kind of really, being off click in a big room, Abbey Road 1 with, 80 people in an orchestra. It's really odd experience, and also all that percussion's really rhythmical as well. If you listen to the theme from Jurassic Park and you listen to what's going on in the tuba bells and the Glock, and it's lots of like sixteenths, and then it's not, that's all interlocked, but then that's all sort of moving, and you're hearing the French horns on one side of you, and then slightly afterwards you're hearing the trumpets on the other side of you. But obviously the Decca tree, which sits above the conductor, is capturing that whole thing, and it's all, it's this beautiful beautiful things. So yeah, different sort of skill.
Wow. Do you know what? You've had, you're a young guy and you've had this incredible career already. And, who knows what's ahead of you. Obviously, well, we know what's immediately ahead of you. You've got to get out and do this tour. You know, Joby, what can I say? Thanks so much. This has been totally different to normal in a really good way. As I say, it's normally just generally drummers. I don't mean just in a derogatory term, but I just offended every drummer watching and listening. But you get what I'm saying. It's nice to have somebody a little bit different on, and you've given us a great perspective into what you do. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So look, yeah, best of luck with the tour and the new album, which is out on the 30th of September. And it's A Percussionists Songbook, if I've got the title correct.
Yeah, bang on. My songbook.
There we go. Yes, indeed. So look, thanks again, Joby. It's been an absolute pleasure, and best of luck with everything to come.
Cheers. Fantastic. Thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye-bye.